You know what's funny about secrets? They have this way of surfacing when you least expect it. I'm Layla, I'm 34, and I've been living what I thought was my perfect life for 6 years now. Dominic proposed a year ago, this incredible guy who actually has his career together, working in medical imaging, making real money. We're planning this beautiful October wedding, small and elegant, exactly what I've always wanted. After the complete disaster that was my first marriage, I finally found someone who gets me. When Dominic and I got serious, he naturally asked about my divorce. That's normal, right? So I told him what any smart woman would, that Jace and I just grew apart, that we handled everything maturely and worked it out peacefully. Dominic was so impressed by how evolved I was about the whole thing. He actually said it showed real character that I could speak positively about an ex-husband. The irony still makes me laugh. The truth? I was married to Jace from 21 to 26, and those years were honestly hell, even though Jace was ridiculously attractive. Seriously, the man still looks like he's barely out of college. But we were both high school dropouts stuck in this dead-end town working these soul-crushing service jobs, and I was so fed up with customers who treated me like garbage. Jace kept pressuring me about being professional and showing up consistently, which just made me more resentful. Why should I smile and take abuse from people who clearly think they're better than me? The depression got so bad that I started talking to this friend who was making decent money dancing at clubs in Atlanta. One day, I just couldn't take it anymore. I hopped on a bus and went to audition. I didn't tell Jace where I was going or what I was planning. I was too ashamed and honestly too scared of his reaction. So I just disappeared. Jace filed for divorce citing abandonment, which was technically accurate. He mailed me a check for $900 from our pathetic joint savings and took on our credit card debt. That was it. Never heard from him again. But Dominic doesn't need to know any of that mess. What he knows is that I'm a responsible medical receptionist who made a thoughtful decision to end her first marriage amicably. That version of me deserves this happiness. See, the thing about reinventing yourself is that eventually the old you tries to catch up. And when it does, it never comes knocking politely. It kicks down the door when you're least prepared for it. I should have known that building a life on edited truths was like building a house on sand. But honestly, I thought I was smart enough to keep those worlds separate forever. Between you and me, Dominic always had this annoying habit of wanting to know everything about everyone. He's one of those people who remembers every detail you tell him and brings it up months later. Sometimes I'd catch myself almost slipping up about my past, but I'd gotten so good at redirecting conversations that it became second nature. When he'd ask about my family or my childhood, I'd flip it back to him or suddenly remember something urgent I needed to do. I thought I was being clever, but looking back, I was probably just lucky that Dominic was so trusting. He never questioned why I didn't have many stories from my 20s, or why I seemed uncomfortable when certain topics came up. He just accepted whatever version of myself I presented and loved me for it. Which honestly made what happened later feel even more unfair. Everything was going perfectly until this guy Mitchell decided to play detective with my life. Apparently, he was some friend of Jace's who saw our engagement announcement that Dominic posted online. Who even does that? Who goes hunting down people from over a decade ago just to cause drama? At first, Dominic just mentioned that someone had reached out to congratulate us. He seemed genuinely excited, thought it was sweet that old friends were reaching out. I played it cool on the outside, but inside, I was panicking. I knew Mitchell from back then, and that guy was always the type to know everyone's business and love sharing it. I tried to brush it off, told Dominic it was probably just someone being nosy, but Dominic has this thing about connections and understanding each other's histories. He actually started researching my past, which made me sick to my stomach. He discovered that divorce records are public, which is complete bullshit. Then he started reaching out to other people from my old life, people I hadn't thought about in almost 10 years. The worst part was watching him get excited about it. He kept making comments about wanting to understand all the chapters of my life and how much he loved learning new things about his future wife. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there knowing that everything he's about to discover is going to destroy the image I've spent 6 years building. I started getting really irritated with him during this phase. Every time he'd mention some new discovery, I'd shut down the conversation or change the subject. When he'd ask why I seemed uncomfortable, I'd flip it back on him. Like, why was he digging through ancient history? Wasn't our present relationship enough? That usually bought me a few days, but then he'd be right back at it. Between you and me, I was also getting annoyed with how naive he was being. Like, did he really think everyone's past was going to be some fairy tale? The man's 40 years old. He should understand that people have complicated histories. But Dominic has always lived in this bubble where everyone tells the truth and relationships are straightforward. It's honestly kind of sweet, but also incredibly frustrating when you're trying to protect both of you from unnecessary drama. I started having these moments where I'd catch him on his laptop, clearly looking up information about me, and I'd feel this rage building up. Like, who gave him permission to investigate my life? We were supposed to be partners, not some detective and suspect situation. But every time I tried to bring it up, he'd make it sound like he was doing it out of love and curiosity, which somehow made me feel like the crazy one for being upset about it. There were nights I'd lie awake next to him, knowing he was probably going to find everything eventually, and I'd think about just telling him myself. But then, I'd remember how perfect things were between us, how much he respected and admired me, and I couldn't bring myself to destroy that. Maybe that makes me selfish, but I'd worked so hard to become someone worthy of his love. Why should I sabotage myself with stories from a lifetime ago? But Dominic has always been one of those people who believes in radical honesty and authentic communication. Which sounds great in theory, but some things are better left buried. Some stories don't need to be told, especially when they happen to a completely different version of yourself. The confrontation happened on a Wednesday evening in early September. I remember because I was already stressed about wedding details, and Dominic had this expression when I walked in, like someone had just delivered terrible news. He had papers spread across our dining room table, and I immediately knew my world was about to implode. "We need to discuss what really happened with Jace," he said, and his voice sounded completely foreign. Cold, disappointed, almost clinical. He'd found everything. The abandonment filing, documentation that I'd left without notice, even old social media posts from mutual friends discussing how Jace had been blindsided. I tried to manage the situation. I explained that divorce paperwork doesn't capture the full story, that Jace was probably bitter and made everything sound more dramatic than it was. But Dominic had been thorough. He'd spoken with Mitchell and several other people who remembered what happened. They'd told him about my work issues, about how I'd vanished without warning, about how devastated Jace had been. "You told me you both agreed to end things," Dominic said, and I could hear genuine hurt in his voice. "You said it was mutual and handled maturely, but you abandoned him, Layla. You just left." That's when I got defensive, because what was I supposed to do? Apologize for survival decisions I made when I was practically a kid? I explained that Jace and I were toxic together, that I was severely depressed and desperate, that sometimes people have to make difficult choices to save themselves. All of which is true. I was drowning in that marriage. But Dominic wasn't interested in context. He kept pushing about why I'd been dishonest, why I couldn't have just told him the truth from the beginning. And the answer is obvious, because the truth makes me look terrible. The truth is messy and unflattering and doesn't align with the successful, stable woman he fell in love with. I tried to explain that everyone presents their best self when dating. Everyone has chapters they'd rather not discuss in detail. But Dominic kept talking about fundamental trust, like we were in therapy, instead of having a normal relationship conversation. "How am I supposed to believe anything else you've told me?" he asked, and that question really pissed me off. Like, one carefully edited story somehow negates 6 years of building a life together? 6 years of supporting his career and being there for him? The argument went on for hours. I kept trying to explain that I was a different person back then, that I'd grown and changed, that the woman who left Jace wasn't the same woman he fell in love with. But Dominic seemed stuck on the principle of the thing. He kept saying it wasn't about what I did to Jace. It was about what I'd done to him by lying for our entire relationship. If you could keep something this big from me for 6 years, what else don't I know about you? He kept asking. And honestly, that question felt so unfair because there wasn't anything else. This was literally the only thing from my past that I'd chosen not to share in full detail. I even tried to turn it around on him. Asked him if he'd told me every single detail about his past relationships, every mistake he'd ever made, every moment he wasn't proud of. But he said this was different because I'd actively constructed a false narrative, not just omitted details. By the end of the night, Dominic looked at me like he didn't recognize me anymore. Like 6 years of loving me meant nothing compared to one story I'd chosen to edit. And that's when I knew we were probably over, even though I couldn't admit it to myself yet. Dominic moved out that weekend, not to some friend's couch. He found a month-to-month rental in a nice part of town. He said he needed time and space to process what he'd learned about my character, and that he was having serious doubts about marrying someone who could deceive him so easily. Our October wedding was officially postponed indefinitely. I found out he'd already started informing his family before he told me. His sister called asking if I was okay, which is how I discovered that everyone in his family already knew our engagement was off. 6 years together, and suddenly I'm getting relationship updates secondhand. I tried everything to salvage things. I called him constantly, sent lengthy messages explaining my perspective, even showed up at his workplace once to try to have a real conversation. But Dominic had completely withdrawn. He kept insisting that the problem wasn't what I'd done to Jace. It was that I'd been capable of lying to him for 6 years about something so significant. If you can lie about this for our entire relationship, what else have you been lying about? He asked during one of our final conversations. How do I know anything you've told me is true? Which is incredibly unfair. Everyone has aspects of their past they're not proud of. Everyone curates their personal history when building a new relationship. I wasn't lying maliciously. I was protecting both of us from unnecessary drama about ancient history. But Dominic couldn't see it that way. He kept using phrases like fundamental dishonesty and character issues. Like I was some kind of criminal instead of someone who'd made a difficult choice during a dark period. Meanwhile, I'm watching my entire future evaporate because of something that happened over a decade ago with someone I never wanted to see again. The man I'd spent 6 years loving and supporting was suddenly treating me like a stranger. Like everything we'd built together meant nothing compared to one story I'd chosen not to share in all its ugly detail. What really got to me was how quickly he seemed to move on emotionally. Like I was still trying to fix things, still believing we could work through this, and he was already talking about our relationship in past tense. He'd made up his mind that I was fundamentally untrustworthy, and nothing I said could change that. I started wondering if he'd been looking for an excuse to leave me anyway. Maybe he'd gotten cold feet about the wedding, and this just gave him the perfect out, because the Dominic I knew would have at least tried to understand my perspective, would have considered the context of my choices, instead of just judging me for them. 3 months after Dominic moved out, I heard through mutual friends that he'd been spending time with someone new. Not just casual dating, actually getting serious with her. Bringing her to places we used to go together. Apparently, she works in healthcare too, some kind of nurse practitioner. And according to everyone who's seen them, they're really good together. When I confronted him about it, he didn't even try to deny it. He said our relationship had ended the moment he realized how easily I could maintain a lie for years. He'd spent weeks trying to decide if he could move past it, but every time he looked at me, all he could think about was what other truths I might be hiding. This isn't about Jace anymore, he told me during our last real conversation. This is about discovering that you're capable of looking me in the eye and lying to me for our entire relationship without any guilt. That's not who I want to build a life with. I tried desperately to make him understand that my situation with Jace was completely different. That was about survival, about escaping a situation that was destroying me. But Dominic had already moved on emotionally. He'd even consulted someone about the engagement ring, treating our 6-year relationship like a business transaction gone bad. Watching him transition so seamlessly to someone else was devastating. 6 years of my life, and within 4 months he's apparently in love with someone else. Someone who probably doesn't have any complicated history or difficult chapters to explain away. Someone who gets to be simple and straightforward. Meanwhile, I'm dealing with consequences of choices I made when I was barely an adult. Choices that shouldn't define my entire character, but apparently do, according to Dominic. It's like he completely erased all the good years we had together, all the ways I supported his goals and stood by him when he was figuring out his career. The engagement ring sits in my jewelry box, like a reminder of how quickly your entire life can fall apart when people refuse to understand that everyone has survival stories they'd rather not advertise. It's been almost 2 years since everything collapsed, and I'm still processing how unfairly the whole situation played out. Dominic married that nurse practitioner about 18 months ago. I found out when his cousin posted wedding photos that showed up in my feed. They had this elaborate celebration that probably cost more than Dominic and I spent on anything during our entire relationship. She looked exactly like you'd expect. Wholesome, uncomplicated, probably never had to make a truly difficult decision in her sheltered life. Dating in your mid-30s is brutal when you have to explain why your last serious relationship ended. How do you tell someone new that your ex left you because he discovered unflattering details about your past? How do you explain that you weren't technically being dishonest, just selective about which stories you chose to share? The thing that really bothers me is how everyone treats me like I committed some unforgivable sin for protecting myself. Like I was supposed to lead every conversation with, "Hi, I'm Layla, and I abandoned my first husband when I was young and desperate." That's not how adult relationships work. Everyone has chapters they'd prefer to keep private. What makes it more frustrating is that Jace never tried to contact me throughout any of this chaos. He never reached out when Dominic was investigating our past, never tried to set the record straight or cause additional drama, which honestly just proves my point that he moved on perfectly fine without me. So what was the big deal anyway? Yes, I left without a formal goodbye, but we were both miserable. Yes, I let him handle the divorce however he wanted, but that was simpler for everyone. I wasn't trying to destroy Jace's life. I was trying to save my own from a situation that was suffocating me. But apparently that makes me deceptive and untrustworthy and fundamentally dishonest. Dominic got to start fresh with his perfect new wife, while I'm left explaining my supposedly terrible character to anyone who might stick around long enough to hear the full story. And honestly, I probably won't be completely transparent about everything next time either. Because look where brutal honesty gets you. Alone and bitter, while your ex builds his dream life with someone who never had to make impossible choices. Sometimes survival requires protecting yourself first, even if other people think you should have handled things differently. But I'm not apologizing for saving myself from a life that was killing me slowly, even if it cost me the future I thought I wanted. Some people get to live simple lives where every decision is easy and every choice is clean. The rest of us do what we have to do and deal with people judging us for it later. The wedding dress is still hanging in my closet, tags attached, a $1,200 reminder that sometimes the truth really isn't worth telling. And maybe that makes me cold or calculating or whatever other names people want to call me, but at least I'm honest about who I am now, even if I wasn't honest about who I used to be.